It's not calling you Josh Frydenberg, it's calling you Dosh Frydenberg.
Under the coalition, taxes for hard-working Australians will always be lower.
You know, I don't hold a hose, mate, and I don't sit in control room.
They're answers that only can come from Victoria, I'm afraid, because that's not my job.
But I ain't spending any time, though, because in the meantime, every 3 months, a person was torn to pieces by a crocodile in North Queensland.
Well, good day, listeners, and welcome once again to the Two Jacks. It's the 24th of July today on a Friday afternoon, and normally, well, in our younger days, Jack, we would be out having a long lunch, but here we are, recording a podcast for our listeners. How are you, mate? This is Hong Kong Jack, of course.
It's hot and steamy here. We need somewhere air-conditioned to be having that long lunch. But
yes, definitely. It's on my list of things to find out about a restaurant before you go there.
Mind you, some of them, they set the air conditioning at Arctic, so that can be a bit of a problem.
Yeah, and if you're sitting right under that vent. Yes. All right. Well, on this 24th of July, the penultimate Friday of July, we have some Redbridge polling data indicating that One Nation could pick up as many as 19 seats in the Victorian state election. 78 seat legislature?
88, I think.
88, right.
Yeah.
So 19 seats there. That would give them a fair slab. And with a sort of 19-seat gain, it would seem pretty unlikely that either of the two major parties would get a majority in the lower house, Jack.
That's
either
right.
one would have to negotiate an arrangement with One Nation to get going.
Or not. I mean, this might be the pathway to Labor for staying in government. It doesn't matter who gets the most seats if nobody else has a majority of the House. It's open to the Premier to go to the Governor and say, look, nobody's got a majority in their own right. I recommend that you reappoint me, and I'll form a government, and you appoint that government, and then see how it goes. Personally, I think that's Labor's probably only chance of remaining in power, because I think
88 members, you need to get to 45 to govern, and with a slab of 19, or let's say 20 going to One Nation, that would make it almost impossible for the Liberals to govern in their own right if they got something in the order of 30, and they would have to. It'd be an inconvenient marriage, Jack. It might be a marriage of convenience, but I think it wouldn't last terribly long. That would be my guess. Yeah,
no. So that would put the pressure on Labor to decide. Well, look, really, and they might finish third or second of the say well behind.
Yeah,
my guess is they'll finish behind the Liberals, right? But perhaps in front of One Nation, right? So they're on the podium, but they're getting a silver. So the choice then is, do they try and stay in power because they think the relationship between the Liberals and the One Nation is too fragile to form a government? Or do they say, look, we deserved a kicking, let's put them in charge and win power back? So it's a tricky thing to try and work out, because there is certainly, I've been speaking to a few Melburnians this week, and there's a fair few Labor people who think, look, we need to burn this lot down and start again, right?
I think there's a perception. I honestly think, and I've said this a number of times, so I'll say it quickly. I think given that the Allan government is probably is definitely at the end of the road, I think, this is going to sort of highlight One Nation's rise a little bit more than might otherwise be the case, let's say, in the New South Wales state election. One Nation will have some support particularly up in the north and so forth, but north of New South Wales. But because you've got this not unusual, and certainly not unique situation, but where a government is at the end of the road, you've got the mob on the other side who've got their problems. There must be in Victoria a sense of, are these guys going to be okay? Can these guys govern in regard to the Liberal Party or the coalition? And then you've got One Nation to the sidelines. So you really will have a sort of three-cornered contest there. There doesn't seem to be any significant other right-wing party like a Palmer-type party to further splinter that vote. But it will bring about some, I think, some quite unusual results, and I think One Nation might do reasonably well in some Labor heartland seats, but I don't think that will be mirrored in New South Wales, for example.
Well, I think One Nation, it might poll to a level, Cos and the Redbridge people say 19 seats. I suspect that's a poll, and when it gets to the HB pencil hovering over the piece of paper, that their vote will come down. People like them because they're not one of the other two, but will they actually trust them enough to vote them? I actually think that those numbers will come down a significant amount. They'll still win seats, I'm pretty sure of that.
I think that's right. I agree. I agree with that, Jack. But I think where they might make some significant inroads, perhaps not winning a lot of Labor heartland seats, but they might pick up a few. But they will vote. They will get fairly strong votes in some of those areas, just because I think people will be voting in protest mode around the Allan government and its travails. So
there will be Labor voters who will think what they're doing is a mercy killing.
Yeah, a little bit, and of course, Labor voters, being Labor voters, they tend not to vote for Liberals when they're annoyed.
Yes.
They'll find some other way. So I think, and at the end of the Victoria, when we dust off the Victorian state election results, there will be this sort of clamour that Labor could lose ground federally and in other states in their safe seats. With losing some support to One Nation, but I don't think that's going to be realised overall. Certainly not in the cities, and I just think that given Victoria, the shape it's in politically, I think you're going to find some unusual results and things that don't necessarily reflect what's going on in the rest of the country.
But do remember, it's not like the Commonwealth Games. Winning the most seats doesn't guarantee you get to form government. And if you're the incumbent, if you're the Premier, you get to have the first conversation with the Governor, and the Governor will accept your advice.
That's a rather twisted metaphor around the Commonwealth Games, Jack. Of course, we are still hosting them, I believe.
In Glasgow, I think.
In Glasgow.
I've got a very good buddy here who's Glaswegian, and he said he'd buy me a beer tonight just in thanks for putting on the Commonwealth Games for all of that.
When do they start, by the way?
The opening ceremony was last night, I think. Yeah.
Oh, good Lord, yeah. Gee, that's
yesterday.
How interested I am in it.
Yes.
I'll certainly be looking at some of the track and field because
the only reason I know is that I saw a photo of on the front page of one of the papers of the King and Queen getting out of a Doctor Who TARDIS at the opening ceremony. So I figured, it must be starting today.
Oh dear, it sounds a bit. It sounds a bit as your father too.
Yeah, well, that whole Doctor Who thing passed me by. I couldn't work it out at all.
Yeah, well, I've got to tell you, I saw an episode of it when I was about 6, and it so terrified me that I never looked at it again. So I was never a Doctor Who fan. Yeah, look, we won't talk too much about the Commonwealth Games on account of me not knowing a whole lot about it. But I presume the opening ceremony did not feature any large blow-up Dan Andrews.
No. Well, I'd completely forgotten it was on until I saw this headline this morning, and because I had the conversation with the Glaswegian mate yesterday.
There should be some good track and field to watch there too. The Brits are very good, and we've got a couple of emerging stars coming through, Jack. Sprinters, both men and women, and some medium and long distance runners.
And there's a Scottish lad who broke a 47-year-old mile record last week.
Well, that will make for a very interesting 1500. All right. So the One Nation, I wouldn't call it a One Nation rise. I think their polling is overall, the news poll showed them being a bit up this week, Jack. But overall, I think there's been a bit of a decline. Look, we'll get to the Australian economy. Let's deal with some trivia first. We had Pauline Hanson over in the UK via Sicily, and interviewed Tommy Robinson. Tell me firstly, what is the attraction around interviewing someone like Tommy Robinson, who's really just a jumped up soccer hooligan?
Well, that's easy to answer, because if you interview Tommy Robinson, you get lots of clicks on social media. And you get lots of publicity. Whether it's good publicity or bad publicity is another question, but you will get lots of publicity. He's a magnet for that sort of thing.
Yeah, fair enough. I just think it's astonishing.
You would have got a lot of publicity for interviewing Hitler too.
We did. That's right. So it's notoriety, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's what you're getting. You're getting noticed. You are getting your face in the public eye.
Well, Barnaby Joyce has said that basically Channel 7 had organised this. There's their Spotlight show, which is their sort of 60-minute show, and they'd arranged it all. But that appears not to be the case, that Hanson had made arrangements of her own, and the Channel 7 were just along to monitor or chronicle it. Yeah, I don't think this stuff goes over terribly well. You're talking about publicity, yes, and there is good and bad, and I think there's a certain notoriety to doing things with Robinson. And I find it hard. You sort of, Hanson said today, I'll speak to whoever I want to, and she's certainly entitled to do that. But I think when you can certainly sense an old politician like Barnaby Joyce's disquiet about it all, that you can, that One Nation will veer further and further into this sort of lunar right, with a very strong sort of racist background. They got sort of caught on there seems to be factions arising, is what I'm saying, Jack, within One Nation.
Certainly Barnaby's dog seemed upset about it.
It was indeed Barnaby's invisible dog. Someone was telling me they've got ultra high sound and they could hear the dog barking. We couldn't hear the dog barking.
I thought it was a Jack Russell Terrier myself.
But of course, as I said in my column this week, there's two Australias, Jack. There's one where we carry our dogs around in sedan chairs in little cutesy outfits, and then there's the other Australia where dogs are utilitarian and do farm work.
You should come to Hong Kong. Well, you are coming to Hong Kong later in the year, but you can wander into a cafe here and find a little Yorkie Terrier poking its head out of the bag on the seat next to you.
Little pistol, that could be pistol or boo, boo, wasn't it?
Yeah. The other thing they do with them is they have, like the old push chairs we used to have for kids, the fairly flimsy one. They'll have one of those for the dog to wheel it around, right?
I know. Oh, they've got little carry bags and things like that.
Yeah, and little boots for the dog.
Yeah. It used to, when I grew up, Jack, and you wouldn't have been dissimilar. Our dog stayed outside, and when it was cold, it would sleep in the laundry.
Yes.
Now,
pretty much.
If it's not if your dog's not sleeping on a bed, you are being cruel.
Yes.
So it really has changed significantly.
It has to be a designer bed.
Yeah, well, or just sleep with just sleep with the owners and you push one or the other out of the bed. We all love our dogs, but this is now a multi-billion-dollar industry, Jack.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the chances.
Just cans of Powell and a brush every now and then.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of the chances of your little dog in Reservoir getting into to sleep with the parents on the bed. I don't think it'd be very high, would it?
I think there were times when Mum would go away, go over to New Zealand to visit relatives, and Jack would sometimes allow our Cocker Spaniel to sleep on the bed.
Yeah.
It's really quite extraordinary. I mean, back in those days, of course, there's an entire market around what they call preteen stuff. Now, when I was growing up as a preteen, Jack, there was nothing for us. There was nothing to buy, and you had to wait for another 4 or 5 years before there was a footy there for you.
A footy for the winter and a cricket bat for the summer. That was it.
And that was about it. So times have changed. And speaking of times changing, Bill Kelty is sort of one of the co-architects of productivity reforms in the Australian economy, has provided his own analysis of where the economy is now. He went out of his way to say that this is not a reflection on the current government, but a series of governments in recent times. And he said the reason we are here today is that we have a bureaucracy that is too interested in looking at the symptoms and ignoring the cause. It is just part of a bucket where we pay for quarantine centres that are never used. That's a good point. Commonwealth Games, we might find them useful at some point in the future, but right now not. Commonwealth Games that are not held in the country, we've just discussed that. Infrastructure costs that are the highest in the world, or at least approach those levels, where the cost of some tunnels are now the highest in the history of humanity, where we simply cannot build enough houses because we did not train enough workers. Is that a fair comment, Jack?
Yes, I think it is.
Yeah. The trouble we have with our governments, Jack, is that they govern for 3 years. They don't govern for 10 or 20. And they'll get caught, as much as they employed that they are working for Australia's future, they will get caught in the electoral cycle. And that usually is the first term's a part of a bit of austerity. Second term, you loosen the spending, and second year in government, loosen the spending, loosen the belt on the spending, and by the time you get into the third year, they're handing out $50 notes on the street corners. So there is that problem, Jack.
Well, I think this particular government at the moment, like most governments in the last half a dozen of the last 4 or 5 governments, is not bold. It lacks a bit of political courage. I listened to and watched the Prime Minister's speech at the Labor conference, and he seems spooked by One Nation, and he's talking about, well, we've got to reduce the pressures on cost of living, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's okay. But people would be much more impressed if you said, we want the economy to grow. We're going to do some things that won't work in 5 minutes, but we're going to make the economy grow again, because that's the way out of our problems for all of us. And I don't think he's prepared to do that.
But you say, I mean, look, I understand what you're saying about political courage, but even with relatively small reforms like negative gearing and capital gains tax, etc., they copped such a belting over that. I mean, part of the belting came from the fact that they said they weren't going to do it before the last election. But it's incredibly difficult to reform, to conduct reform now without copping an absolute bucketing from the media, from social media, from vested interests all over the place.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything you do in government's going to upset somebody, but it really requires a bit of Keating-esque courage and a capacity to sell the narrative, a capacity to say to the Australian people, we are floundering with no growth, and that's the truth, right? The OECD just told us that, right? We're floundering. So
what about Gina's idea of opening up the Northern Territory as an economic free zone? No, what would it be? A tax free zone? What are you talking about?
Something like that. I don't think those kind of things really work.
Dubai in Darwin, Jack.
Yeah, I don't think it would work necessarily in the Northern Territory in any event. But if you go to the people and say, we've got a problem and we're going to do a whole lot of things to fix it, and you're not going to like some of them on the spot, but it's worthwhile because that's our best chance. Someone's got to be strong enough to stand up and say that and mean it. Which Keating was able to do. Keating was able to convince people that he actually meant to do this, right? And he was saying, "Yep, you're not going to be happy about it, but we're going to do it."
I was in the office a while back, and I was going through archives, Jack, and I was looking at a lot of the reporting around the Hawke Keating reforms, and it was not unlike this. I'd spent some time looking at the reforms to. Basically business expenses, which was, I think, in the first Keating budget. And there were howls of the world was going to come to an end and all this sort of stuff. It really was. Of course there were.
Yes.
And angry editorials and angry commentary pieces and all this sort of stuff.
And everybody enjoying a lunch was complaining about it.
Well, we weren't quite sure. I was in the lunch business in those days. I was working in publishing. So we thought, oh, my God, this could be the end of the world as we know it. But
it wasn't.
It wasn't at all.
No.
It wasn't at all.
No.
And that is part of the problem. It's more intense now. It's magnified now, particularly with the rise of social media and, the sort of shenanigans that can occur around that. But nevertheless, you do always get this reporting whenever you bring in a reform that says you lied, you did this, it's going to be impossible. It's, what are we going to do? I think overall we're seeing some sort of polling that let's say on housing, for example, 2/3 of Australians want lower housing prices, Jack.
Yes.
Which is, this is something that the government can tap into, in terms of its dialogue, in terms of its communications.
If it has the courage to stand up and say it. I can remember the debate about the fringe benefits tax, et cetera, and how it was going to kill lunch.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
Well, I think we were both in the lunch business in the late 80s in Melbourne. And it was very good fun, right?
It was good fun, and the FBT stuff had no consequences.
No, it didn't seem to. Yeah.
Didn't seem to slow us down at all. No. One little thing, and I do want to talk about this now, Jack. I'm sorry. I've been involved with people with chronic fatigue syndrome in this country. ME is the right term for it, myalgic encephalomyelitis. A terrible condition, chronic. It makes people housebound and bedridden and so forth. Now they have got it's an advocacy group that actually does training, as does things for the benefit of people with ME, and it's called Emerge. Now, Emerge, part of what they do is to train GPs, and they've trained about 10% of Australia's 40,000 GPs into diagnosing and treating ME in the right way. There have been some appalling mistreatments along the way. I won't get into the history of it. Now, my understanding, don't quote me on the number, but they receive about $400,000 in government funding. They also rely a little bit on donations. They've been, as far as I can tell, cut out of the budget. So $400,000, which is just nothing really in terms of public funds. They're all set up to do this stuff. And if it's defunded, if that defunding continues, I'll be doing a letter writing campaign to a number of MPs, including Jed Carney, and saying, if this mob goes to ground, can't can't operate anymore, it will cost millions to bring it back. It will cost millions to bring up something, a group that does something similar. For the life of me, I can't figure it out, Jack. Have they got accountants just going through line by line, just cutting things out? $400,000, it's money well spent for people who, let's face it, as a husband of one of the ME sufferers said, it's not as if these people can go out in the streets and protest. And maybe the government's sort of saying, well, what can these people do to us? Having said that, there are an estimated 250,000 people in Australia with ME. And as a person of the progressive left, I look at what Labor's done there, and I just shake my head and think this is just unbelievably bad. So I'll keep our listeners a bit more informed as we go about who responds to letters and what have you. But imagine cutting $400,000 in a budget. They also do a sort of telehealth thing. They've got nurses there that can direct people to the right places and provide advice and so forth. So, this is they're working on a shoestring. They're doing things that governments can't or could do, but only with the injection of millions of dollars more. And they're being brushed, Jack. It's just disgraceful. Which takes us on to the Labor conference, Jack. And you mentioned the speech by Albo. He's talking about tax cuts and offsets for salaried workers, Medicare and health support. There we go. Throw a merge funding into that. Expansions include more subsidies, cheaper medicines. There's a big problem with the PBT at the moment. With the and this has been reported in the Australian, that a lot of the pharmaceutical companies are avoiding Australia as a place for clinical trials, and that leaves people suffering from often rare conditions having to raise extraordinary sums of money and go and receive treatments overseas, often in the United States. And that's largely because of the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, which I said PBS, which is causing angst. And you could say, oh, well, the big pharma are just standing over people. But in a sense, they can't make the sums work for themselves if they've got a subsidised drug that's available for $6.50 for everybody, while the cost of that drug is hundreds times more. So it seems to me the PBS needs to be reformed, sort of root and branch, especially for new drugs. Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean.
I mean, once they've made them for 4 or 5 years, they get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper.
And once the trademarks, the copyrights, the intellectual property shifts. But yes, for new treatments, particularly in certain forms of brain cancers, those sorts of things, we're being left out. Largely because of the PBS. You could say it is big pharma, wanting to increase their profits, and you might be right to a degree. But yeah, we're missing out because of the PBS and the way it's structured, and it probably does need to be reformed, Jack.
Yes.
But Health Minister Butler seemed not troubled by it, but there are a number of people in that industry who are raising the alarm about the PBS and keeping Australians away from either clinically trialled drugs or drugs that have just emerged on the market. And there's so much going on there. We're sort of on the verge of cure for cancer in many cases. Yes,
certainly a cure for some kinds, yes.
Yeah, and we're moving more and more towards this we can keep cancers at bay at least and allow you to live a longer life, whereas that 10 years ago that was not the case. But a lot of these treatments are not being made available in Australia.
So there are always trade-offs with things like the PBS. You've just got to get the trade-off right.
Well, you've got to negotiate with the industry.
Yeah.
and you to a degree you've got to come to some sort of arrangement with them.
Yeah.
What should Labor be doing about One Nation, Jack? Elbow's tactic is currently not to mention them by name.
I don't care too much about that. Really, I think that's unimportant. What would be important? I mean, it really gets down to, are you going to do something about the economy? Because if you get the economy right and stop saying silly things, One Nation will just wither on the vine.
I agree. All right. The human headline passed away at the age of 82. I think he's been gone now for 14 days. There was a memorial service. He was the one-time partner of a good friend of mine, Jackie Weaver.
Twice.
Set out some lovely tributes to him. And
one of my mates said, "Was it what sort of a bloke was he?" I said, "I don't know, but he can't have been too bad. Jackie Weaver married him twice, you know."
Yeah, that's right. So, and Jackie is just a lovely person. He's a complicated figure. Of course, you know, people in Melbourne or Victoria will remember his current affairs shows. Always
his radio first, you know. I mean,
yeah, he did the Hinch thing, which he did the Hinch program. He did unearth a number of scandals, and he was said to be a profound friend of people who had suffered sexual abuse as children. And he, you know, would always say that he suffered from it as well as a young boy in New Zealand, Jack. But the reality of it doesn't quite measure up, because Hinch, if you remember him going to jail, I think he went away for 11 days for contempt of proceedings. I'll try and tell this story as quickly as I can. And it related to a trial of a former Catholic priest by this stage, and his name was Michael Glennon. He was the parish priest in Reservoir for a long time, Jack. And he ran these sort of martial arts classes and camps in central Victoria, where children were taken up and often abused by him, by this priest. He was convicted of child sex offences, I'm going to say in 1979, off the top of my head. And the Catholic Church very quickly laicized him, but he continued operating as this kind of clerical figure who also had these camps. And Hinch learned that these camps were still going on. And even though, so Glennon was charged again over the indecent dealing with a number of girls. And then Hinch apparently rang John Cain, who was Premier of Victoria at the time. He also contacted the Attorney General. And he said, you know, this Glennon character's still doing what he's been doing. And they said, well, we can't do very much because we've got this trial coming up. So Hinch decided at that stage that he was going to let it all he was going to mention Glennon. He was going to mention Glennon as previously convicted. He was also going to mention the camps and that he believed that the abuse was still ongoing. Now, what that did was immediately suspend the trial of Glennon. Hinch was charged with contempt of proceedings, and he was ultimately jailed for, I think, 11 days. You know, he was given a fine and he refused to pay it, and off he went to a pretty comfy little rural jail in Gippsland. Once that all took place, Glennon's trial resumed, and he was ultimately found guilty. He then Glennon had his conviction overturned in the Victorian Supreme Court, which meant he was a free man. He continued his camps. he continued to abuse children. I looked at this. It's probably as many as 20 children were abused in this 4-year period between the time when he should have been convicted, no questions asked, had Hinch not interfered, and ultimately in that 4-year period, the DPP in Victoria sought the conviction was returned in the High Court. But there was a 4-year period there, as I say, where Glennon continued his activities, and had Hinch not intervened, the conviction would have stood. There would have been no prospect. I mean, the appeal was done on the basis that Glennon was denied a fair trial because of Hinch's comments.
Yes.
And that to me was like, oh, here I am. I'm acting with the right motives, but I'm going to seek a headline. I'm going to work outside the system, and wherever the chips fall, wherever they may, except to say that kids were molested, indecently dealt with, assaulted, raped by Glennon during this period where he should have been behind bars had Hinch kept his mouth shut.
Well, sometimes the worst thing you do is interfere with the justice system taking its course, and that was kind of obvious at the time. I got to say that I never really liked Hinch much. The only thing I'd say to my appreciation was, as I said, was that Jackie Weaver must have seen enough in him to marry him twice. But he did change. He changed radio in Melbourne and then television in Melbourne, and in a way that I think is ultimately good. Right? I kind of like talkback radio, and I like tabloid TV. I don't watch it all that much, but I like that it's there. Right? And I think he's overall. I agree with you entirely about the Glennon thing. That was just,
he was just big noting, wasn't he? He was just big noting.
Firstly, it was foolish, and secondly, it certainly looked like it was foolish for a very poor reason. That is that I was just big noting myself, right?
When I wrote the piece, quite a few years ago now, it was when Hinch was in the Senate with the Justice Party. He described it as a hit job, but he didn't say, no, this is not true, because it was true. What he did say was, I've spoken to a number of parents of victims who still continue to support me. Well, yeah, sure. Did you speak to any of those whose children were indecently dealt with by Glennon as a result of his interruption of criminal proceedings against Glennon? And yeah, of course, he had nothing to say there. So yeah, I guess it was a sort of a mixed legacy, Jack. Not without controversy, but the thing that bothered me most about him was in relation to that matter. When it came down to, will I allow processes to be followed, or whether I sort of want to make a big noise, he'd always choose the big noise. But he was on his second live. He blocked me on Twitter, Jack. As I must say, he actually had a little photograph of a glass of red on his Twitter, and wishing everyone a Merry Christmas. And I replied, I said, what, are you going to go through a second liver now, are you? He blocked me straight away. No, I can honestly say I was not a fan. But he did, in fact, found the Justice Party, Jack, that are kind of still around. I don't think they've been deregistered. I think they're still there, but...
his political stuff, he was just kind of a novelty candidate in a sense.
Wasn't he?
Yeah, but his really profound impact, I think, was on the radio and on television. That he changed the way we went about some of that, and in a way, and I kind of liked it in the end. I did enjoy him when he was doing it, but I think the change to a talkback format's probably saved radio in Melbourne.
Yeah, certainly 3AW should have weighed in with a wreath, Jack, because he got them going, and I think he was on another. I think he was on 3XY at one stage too.
Yeah. The first career was at 3AW, and then onto the television, and then later on he meandered back through the less well-paying jobs at the other stations.
Mate of mine was a waiter at the restaurant that Hinch would lunch at every Friday. Place in Toorak Road, couldn't tell you, it's probably not there anymore. Restaurant there, sort of 5-star sort of place, and the waiter had no good stories to tell about Jared Hinch either.
Oh no, he was known as a bit of a pig in some of those social settings. Yeah, I mean,
Alrighty, where are we off to next, Jack? Okay. Where do we go with? Well, let's move on to Crimea, Jack. Now, we know the Ukrainians can't hold Crimea, but they're making life unbearable for those who live there. And as the Ukrainians are very innovative and effective. I mean, we'd have to say that, Jack. It's been extraordinary, the fight. They've lost a bit of territory to their east. But the Black Sea, which, God, going back 4 years, we thought there was going to be a blockade there. Ukrainian goods, particularly grain, would not be able to leave harbours and so forth. Russia's Black Sea fleet virtually doesn't exist anymore. It's been taken out.
There is a blockade in the Black Sea. It's a blockade against Russia, not against Ukraine.
Yeah, I know. It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? You've got to say, I know that Zelensky had some problems. There were protests in Kyiv about his sacking of his defence secretary, and replacing him with probably a hardliner. And there was some disquiet amongst Ukrainians there, but I guess the fact that they are having protests is a good sign on the streets.
Yes,
but the overall thing I think about this is that it's a really dangerous situation. I am a big supporter of the Ukrainians, so I'm not suggesting they've done anything wrong, but what we've got is now Putin backed into a corner. And if you've looked at the career of Vladimir Putin, you know that when he's in these sorts of positions, he doesn't act rationally. There's, whatever response he has is not a normal one. And so it does raise the spectre of, and Gerard Baker was talking about this in the Wall Street Journal, that, there may be an attack on a NATO country, perhaps one of the Baltic states. There may be an attack on Moldova. There's so much that can happen here, and none of it's good. The one thing Vladimir Putin can't do is sue for peace. Because if he sues for peace, the Kremlin's going to, he'll be hanging from a lamppost in 2 weeks' time. Because he can't sell a peace after launching what they call a military expedition of some description. They're not calling a war, but now they can't turn around and say, we've sorted it all out now. It just wouldn't work. He would know this more than you and I, that would be the end of him. So
what's changed in Crimea is that the Ukrainians have weakened his ability to support Crimea by cutting off supplies. They're now short of water, electricity, etc., on Crimea, and Crimeans are seeking to leave. Right?
Yeah. En masse. Yeah.
And of course the Ukrainians seem to have the capacity to inflict some damage on the Russian economy. Some damage, not a lot, but some damage almost at will.
But it's so specifically targeted, Jack.
Yeah, and they've got a limited capacity, but they're targeting it well. The Russians had a one of their regular bond sales last week, and they cancelled it because they couldn't get buyers. And their buyers are mainly within Russia. So there's some economic pressure going on the government as well.
Yeah. And so the response from Putin is, look, Russia is never far away from civil war. And, anything could trigger a civil war in Russia, regardless of whether Putin's leader or not. I mean, that's just the way. That's just the way history tells us Russia will respond. So that's a live possibility too going forward. There is also a prospect that Russia will become almost a satellite of China, like I say, none of these solutions are going to sit comfortably with Russians. They do have an election coming up, but Vladimir Putin's party, they've always been able to separate Putin and the party.
Yes.
Because the party's not popular. I mean, it gets 88% of the vote, but a bit dodgy elections. But they've always been able to separate Putin from the party itself, and in this election, that's not happening. So it is Vladimir Putin's party is running for re-election now. They'll be re-elected. That's not the problem. But the problem is that Putin and a deeply unpopular party are now being put together, again, it's just another problem. Lubashenko in Belarus, he was all guns blazing a few years ago, Jack. Now he's offering apologies to Vladimir Zelensky and saying he can work with him and all this sort of stuff.
You were talking before about the possibility of Russia becoming a puppet of China. I don't think that's true, but I also don't think that that when President Putin sits down with President Xi, they sit down as equals anymore.
No. That's part of it, and certainly if the scenarios that I was talking about are sort of an attack on a NATO country or a NATO-aligned country did occur. That would almost certainly have to be. Well, Putin would need approval. Yes, is what I'm saying, and I don't want to deal with that too much more. I did notice something, Jack, that thousands of Russian passports had been sent to Moldova, the Eastern European Republic there, and normally that signals, like Crimea, like Georgia, that if there's going to be a succession or a move to move away from Russian influence, what they do is basically load up people with Russian citizenship, as they did in Crimea and in eastern Ukraine. So, well, we've got to come in and protect all these Russians. So that's been happening too in Moldova. Thousands of Russian passports have been shipped to the country. Interesting times, and as I say, the dangerous business is that Putin is essentially backed into a corner. He knows what will happen to him if he gets it wrong, and really he's got a lot wrong so far, and one imagines that the push against him isn't far away.
Well, when you finish up your job in Russia, you can't do a Jacinta Ardern and retire to the northern beaches and relax.
Just get that consultancy.
Yeah. Now tell me, if they sent you a Russian passport, would you think this is a good idea?
I'm looking forward to the liberation of Russia, so I may return to the mother country. Yes, of course. For our listeners, I was sanctioned by Russia, crikey, about 4 or 5 years ago, and that was mainly because I was writing about one of their agitators here. One of the pro-Putin types. And of course, Malcolm Roberts, Jack, he's been we haven't mentioned Malcolm with the One Nation thing. He seems to think Vladimir Putin's terrific man. But Malcolm does his own research, as we all know. Strait of Hormuz, Jack, we are looking at it like a quagmire, aren't we? I know there's been a major strikes in Iran from the US today, as reported by Donald Trump himself. I know you've always said this has got a long way to go, but we've got now the Houthis in the Red Sea. I imagine that's not as big a threat, but they are hitting. They have struck a number of oil tankers there. Prices of oil's going up again.
Over 100 this morning.
Yeah, it was over 100. Yeah,
I think the difference in Yemen is that the Houthi problem is more easily fixable than the Iran problem. I think it's still good. I mean, my view of it all hasn't changed. I think Iran's been at war with the United States and with the West since the bombing of the Marine barracks in Beirut, back in the late 70s, and going to war with them is a good idea. I'd like to see it going a bit better. And at the moment, it's not going right.
We'd love to see. I mean, I think we'd love to see regime change in Iran, but it's not going to come this way. I mean, I do want to just remind our listeners of the story told by Swan and Haberman in the book Regime Change, where Netanyahu addressed senior figures of the US government, including Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, the director of the CIA. I think Hegseth was there. And Netanyahu put forward the case of regime change occurring by US bombing, etc. US and Israeli bombing combined. And Trump was said to be impressed. Rubio and the CIA, the director of the CIA, they went away and they came back and said, look, the following day, Netanyahu was no longer there, and said, look, we think it's all junk. We think it's regime change is not possible.
Rubio's been saying this publicly since that time.
Yeah.
Nothing, not just to the president. He's been prepared to say that on television.
Yeah, he's one of the more impressive, not that there are many, members of that cabinet. And Trump, he was quite impressed by the Netanyahu presentation, and he decided to go with that. And that's where we are. That's why we are where we are. And it's looking for the political consequences for Donald Trump. We'll get on to the Democrats in a minute. The political consequences for Donald Trump are pretty severe, given that it seems now highly unlikely that any sort of settlement will occur, that the Strait of Hormuz will be open to shipping for a period of time leading up to the midterms in November.
Oil over $100 a barrel is not good news for him insofar as the midterm elections goes. I mean, it's 4 months to go, so,
Yeah, we're starting to get to the point of no return, though, aren't we? Because of just how long it takes for oil to be priced and then delivered to the pump. So there are significant problems there for him, and which might just let us have a quick look at the Democrats and how they're travelling. Well, there's Mandani in New York as the New York mayor. I did notice that Fox News were running some coverage on him, and obviously not terribly helpful or friendly. But a lot of the Fox News listeners were going, "We like this. We like the cut of this guy." But the fact remains that if the Democrats wanted to go hard left, they might get a little bit of a boost in the midterms. I think it's now more likely than not that they'll win the Senate, and they'll win. I think it was always pretty likely that they'd take the House. But they do have some rather odd candidates, or did have, in the case of Graham Plattner, Jack. Clearly there was a problem there. He's dropped out now after allegations of sexual assault. And there are a number of other issues around that sort of thing, Jack, where Democrats were providing a candidate for the Californian gubernatorial election. what do they need to do to? I mean, probably just not very much is the answer, but they've got to come up with credible candidates, don't they? In these midterms.
The problem with Platten is a problem they keep repeating. That is that they know that they've got a problem with the white working class, right?
Yeah.
And they try and choose candidates that will appeal to the white working class.
While ignoring their histories.
While ignoring their histories. And also not understanding that they don't really appeal to the white working class. So you give Tim Waltz the job as the vice presidential candidate, and you say, "Oh, we'll take him out hunting and doing all this stuff," and he's self-evidently hopeless at it, right? He doesn't really fit.
Not his go.
Yeah. And then they do the reverse. I only found this out a couple of months ago. John Kerry, when he's the presidential candidate, they were forever taking footage of him on his windsurfer or on his $5,000 road racing bike, right? But he grew up playing ice hockey and plays occasional ice hockey games even in Washington. In fact, he had to go to a meeting at the White House with two black eyes back when he was a senator, because he'd been given a thorough biffing in a congressional ice hockey game. I've got to tell you, I would be running that rather than the windsurfing. It's just much more convincing. The other thing they're doing is, I think I might have sent you some quotes from Van Jones, Bill Maher, a couple other people who are absolutely Democrats. Right?
Oh, Maher, you wouldn't know. I mean, Maher he just kicks with the wind. But go on.
And Van Jones was in the Obama administration for most of it, and they just get fed up with the Democrats putting up the Mandami, I want open borders, I don't want police, et cetera, candidates. That they just won't stop doing this, and that's going to turn off Democrat voters. I think they're right. I don't think they'll win the Senate, by the way.
I mean, look, Maine was very winnable. But not perhaps now because of the problems with Platten. I think they'll win Texas. I think they'll get a Texas senator up. But just because of the way that battle's going to look, I think it's more likely than not now, and that's what the betting markets are saying, Jack, that they will have a majority in both houses, and then it will become very, very interesting just to see how Trump handles that. Because it will be a very different Congress that he has to deal with, rather than rubber stamp. He hasn't had a rubber stamp. There is a sense of, if I understand it, watching American politics and commentary about it, there is a sense that the Republicans would like to move. A lot of Republicans would like to move away from Trump, but they just can't.
No one ever gets a rubber stamp in American politics.
That's true.
You might have a dominant thing. There's only been 3 occasions in recent history, going back to the war, that a president's held on to the House in the second term. So you would expect him to lose the House, if not the Senate.
But if he gets rolled in the Senate, that's lame duck for 2 years, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I just think it's really interesting. I don't have a lot of faith in the Democratic Party, and I think this is part of the problem, Jack. This is the real
your lack of faith.
Well, no. Sorry, not my lack of faith in the Democratic Party, but they have almost a sort of compulsory pluralism there, and that's the way the Democrats and Republicans have looked after themselves. I talk about this business. Ross Perot running in 1992, getting 19% of the vote. So terrified were these, at state level, they decided to basically keep third-party candidates off the ballot. So we saw that with Kennedy in 2024. He would have been kept off around about the ballot in about 30 states. And that means if you're an independent voter, if you register or if you're required to in a state, register as an independent, and 40% of voter registrants are now independent, Jack, they don't have a candidate. They don't have. They've got to pick and choose between, the best or the least worst option, and that's part of the problem. There are other problems around their electoral funding and so forth that are really significant and need to be reformed. But there's no prospect of that. I just want to briefly touch on, Jack. Obviously Trump had a rather garbled public speech about election integrity. What, if anything, can he do to disrupt the midterm elections if it's looking bad? There's not a lot he can do. It's sort of people were saying, he can put ICE agents and stuff on the streets. I said, well, that's not going to bother too many people who are citizens and therefore can vote. Might intimidate a few to stay home, but there's not much else.
The only option he has really is that there's a couple of aspects of the emergency powers he can use to have a little bit more say, not take control of, but a bit more say in the state-run election contests. I mean, because the difference between the United States and Australia is that in Australia, the Australian Election Commission, the federal runs all the elections, right? It runs trade union elections by and large, all that kind of stuff. In the United States, they're all run in a kind of a piecemeal way by the local state or authority, right? And there is there's at least an argument that constitutionally he could use some residual presidential powers to have more say on that. But it would go straight to court, and I don't think he can.
There's really not a lot that can be done because of the way it's figured. I mean, if you wanted to reform American politics or electoral politics, you would have a federal body independent of government who oversees all elections in all states.
Yeah, not going to happen.
Not without probably a protracted civil war, Jack, that could go for about 25 years. So, but their democracy has failed on that basis. Not just that, but the fact that you cannot have a presidential candidate outside the two-party system, I think is extraordinarily limiting. It's just what I think Trump, that's what I've said this before, Trump is a symptom, not the disease. The disease is this kind of locked-in pluralism that is not representative of really getting towards the majority of Americans.
I kind of disagree with that. I actually think it does reflect what America really is. And it's a very different country to a place like Australia. There's
wouldn't argue that.
Perth's not that different to Bendigo, right? Whereas, San Francisco's very, very different to Laramie. And that's why it really only holds together and works as a federal system with quite different rules from state to state.
Well, I just don't think it's representative, and that's the problem, Jack. So that's the issue. So if you're an independent voter, who the hell are you going to vote for? Who's going to represent your interests? And I think that's a huge part. Also, the Supreme Court's waving through of CPACs, probably 15 years ago now, was another thing. So it just vested interests are now encouraged to throw extraordinary amounts of money into the Democrat Party or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party.
or its nominees, more accurately.
Yeah, that sort of stuff. And again, that's another thing that if you wanted to rip it all up and start again, you would overturn all that sort of stuff too. So, yeah, I honestly think their democracy is a very sick sort of place.
What about Marine Le Pen? We should just briefly mention her.
Yeah, she's polling around about 67%. We're basically looking like an absolute front runner in the French presidential election.
Yeah, which is stage 1 and 2 in your autumn next year, and at the moment she's kind of well in front. She hasn't got an insurmountable lead by any means.
No.
But but she looks more likely than not to be the next president of France.
The French left are very, very good too at banding together to defeat common foes, and they did that once before. I'm just wondering, Jack, felony conviction seems to be all the rage now for political leaders.
Oh, it's not going to harm her at all.
No. Andy Burnham.
And that's in part because it was a fairly unconvincing conviction. It was for, slightly dodgy accounting when dealing with the EU.
It's a bit more than slightly dodgy, Jake. Moving on, though.
This is the EU we're talking about. So I think everyone gets into the EU.
Yeah, but you can't have money given to you from the MEP that you put into party political funds, and that's what she got done for. But meanwhile, we have a new Prime Minister in the UK, Jack, Andy Burnham. He won't wear a shirt and tie. I think
he's going to wear the shirt,
except when he will wear a shirt, but not a tie, as Prime Minister, except when he's in the House of Commons or for exceptional circumstances. That's no big deal. That's his sort of go. But he has hit the ground running with some sort of popular stuff, which I think he's got a very limited honeymoon. And I think he needs to get and do a little bit of this popular stuff. There's a £2 bus fare cap across England, outside of London, that is, from January. 20% business rate cuts for pubs. It's been very popular so far. Jack just announced, I think earlier in the week, possibly yesterday, 20% business rates cuts for pubs, clubs, and live music venues, Jack.
Well, they cranked those business rates up 18 months, 2 years ago, and it was very unpopular.
Yeah,
so bringing them back down, and because
there was talk then of the death of you might remember Starmer being kicked out of a pub.
Yeah.
And
not allowed in, I think, actually. I mean,
yeah.
He was going in to do a photo op in the public, and
wasn't having a bar of it.
No, gave him the don't come in.
Yeah, that's right. So that's sort of been scrapped, but it's also there are business rate cuts that work across that sector. So again, that's sort of popular stuff. He scrapped the VAT. The UK's GST on domestic electricity bills from October. Those will have little cost of living benefits across the board.
I mean, they're a bit like the Australian cost of living adjustments that Albo's arranged. They're really quite small.
Yeah, it's relatively small stuff, but I think it's. One, it's rebuilding or reconstructing around some of Starmer's key mistakes, particularly around taxation, and showing himself willing to do that. But I think the biggest problem he's going to get is how to attract investment in the UK, and that's going to be the big one. How he can get some of these public-private partnerships that he's so beloved of, weighing in with significant investment. If you look at the investment side of things, Jack, around the UK, it's not pleasant at all. Very, very poor figures.
And he's got a problem. He's got 11 million British citizens of working age who are on benefits. 11 million.
Yeah, I'm reluctant to get engaged in that. I do see that it's been growing and growing and growing, but you've got a lot of people, as I said before, in relation to Australia and CF. You've got a lot of chronic illness. You've got a lot of stuff being driven by COVID infection that we're only just beginning to find out about now, Jack. What is loosely called long COVID is leading people to have lifelong illness. You certainly don't want to be encouraging people to go on to welfare, but it's a lot harder to get them off.
They're at the point where their welfare payments are now exceeding their tax take.
That's not good.
No.
All right, over to sport now, Jack. Let's just review the World Cup, the FIFA, as Donald Trump calls it. Did you see him on the on the podium?
I did. I don't believe he appeared in any of the Spanish commemorative photos.
Well, they were doing the Donald Trump dance. Some of the players were doing the Donald Trump dances in the background. You just got to get the hell off, man. This is not about you. And, we'll print you out a little medal you can wear later on. And, anyway, I thought it was a great result, the final. Argentina. Did you see the petition that was going to have zero impact, but it was still significant numbers. Millions and millions of people had signed the petition saying that Argentina should not be playing in the final. I think it's the second biggest signed petition in history. I'm not sure what the first one is, but they were having a crack at the Guinness Book of Records on that one.
Well, the Argentinians, I think, pulled off one of the great sporting achievements ever. They've managed to unify all of the football community around the world in behind one idea, is that they're a pack of arseholes and cheat, right?
That's right. Well, they're not the only ones. But look, there's some sort of hideous racism and stuff like that occurs. I did see an interview of a bloke who went to Buenos Aires and married an Argentinian, and he went with his father-in-law to, oh God, the name of the stadium. It seats about 160,000 people, and as a sort of,
this is where Boca Juniors play.
And as a sort of clean skin, he said, "Oh, surely my wife can come." Oh, no, and it's not that he was being sexist; it's just way too dangerous, way too dangerous to go and watch the soccer there. But we'd have to say some of the reffing, some of the umpiring was not great around the World Cup. We could say the same of just about any sport at the moment, but it was overall a
huge success.
A success. I think some of us eye rolled when we saw that they'd expanded the competition, the number of qualifiers, but I think that added to it. Certainly seeing countries like Cape Verde, even Australia, New Zealand competing, Iran, of course, sort of added to the great sense of the globe is watching, the entire planet is watching, and soccer is a game of great excitement, isn't it? It's very low scoring compared to rugby union, Australian rules, American football. So you have these great moments of tension that are released when someone does something extraordinary, kicks a goal.
Yeah. As to the football itself, Fernando Torres, the former, who did he play for? Can't remember.
Here he is.
Yeah,
Argentina didn't lose the World Cup because Spain were untouchable. They lost because they completely lost control of themselves. The moment football disappeared and anger took over, the final was over. Well, of course, there was a bit of biffo after the game.
Yeah. The thing that he said at the end, I think, is really true. They gave away the one thing no champion can afford to lose in a World Cup final, their composure. I've got to say, that just doesn't just apply to sport, first of all. It applies to a lot of things, but it certainly applies to Australian rules and cricket and all that kind of stuff. Once you lose your composure, you're dead.
It's right. It's what coaches will tell you. You need to live in the present. You need to forget about what's happened in the past and stop wondering about what's going to happen in the future and just follow your processes.
Staying calm is a superpower.
Who's the best footballer in the world now, Jack? Is it still Lionel Messi? Is it Mbappe? Is it the Big Dane? I kind of like the Big Dane just because he kicks goals.
Probably a list a bit like that, actually. I mean,
the Big Dane, he seems to he carries himself so damn well. He's very good with fans. He's very accessible and a lot to like about him.
He looks like he's enjoying himself, which is nice.
Looks like he's having a good time. And I just noticed a couple of the goals where he's actually walking around, looking at the ground while the Danes are sweeping the ball forward, and he's just sort of he hasn't even broken out of a trot, and then he does a little bit of a trot, and then explosive pace over about 3 metres, and then bang, ball in the back of the net. Yeah, he's quite something. The AFL, Jack, the Nicky Winmar case, I thought it was over the top. Now, I know I want to explain this. He was convicted of domestic violence offences.
A nasty one.
And it was unpleasant. It was distinctly unpleasant, or more than unpleasant. It was extremely violent behaviour. Once he was convicted, the statue went down at Optus Oval in Perth, and then the AFL followed suit by taking him out of the...
Eventually.
Yeah, it didn't take him long. It just all seemed... Yeah, he was taken out of the
Hall of Fame.
The Hall of Fame.
But that took 2 weeks. This is their problem against the rugby league. Volandis would make that decision in an hour, and seriously, I think a little bit more thought than that would be required. Probably 2 hours.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean about it, because looking at it from my point of view, it just seemed precipitous. It just seemed that there was almost an arbitrary sort of decision without any process around it.
They spent 2 weeks doing this.
There are a raft of members, a number of members at least, of the AFL's
Hall of Fame,
who've had some problems with the law too, particularly around domestic violence. Wayne Carey being one, Gary Ablett being another one. Although that wasn't a domestic violence issue, that was more a drug taking, someone dying in your hotel room issue.
Yes.
And there just doesn't seem to be much regard of this. I mean, if you were Nicky Winmar, you would feel, look, he deserves to feel guilty and awful about what he's done there in terms of the domestic violence convictions. But I just thought it was precipitous and a bit unnecessary, or it might have been a better approach to say, well, let's have a look at this in a little while, in the coming months. Let's say let's review this then.
Well, he said that he thought the suspension might have been more appropriate. Look, I think they should have made the decision really quickly, because the AFL got a problem with not being able to make decisions. They look terrible. The admin looks a shambles.
Well, I think the biggest problem is consistency, Jack.
But when I look at this, I look at he was a fabulous player to watch, just a joy to watch. And I think he played a really, really important role in fixing race problems in the AFL, right? And that should not be walked away from. You know, probably the right thing to do is to say, look, it's a nasty domestic violence thing. We think we should give you a holiday from the Hall of Fame. Let's give you a suspension. Come back and look at it. You say you're turning your life around. If you have turned your life around, we're not going to judge you on your worst day of your life. And the other thing is, football can't just be for the choir boys. Football's got to be for the bad kids as well. So society needs that. I
think you need to draw a line around domestic violence, though, Jack.
Yeah.
Or draw a line under.
I agree. That's why he gets the suspension.
But of course, Wayne Carey was involved in similar sort of matters, and that seems not to have been dealt with at all.
Well, no, he got a delay.
Is the problem, isn't it?
Well, no, Wayne Carey got a delay. He on any reasonable assessment of when he should have been in the Hall of Fame, he was about 3 years or 4 years behind, right? They held on to it because he had that problem. Same sort of thing as a suspension. I think in this case, a suspension, I would go, yeah, that's fine. Give him the suspension. Let's have a look again in 2 years.
What about the statue?
The statue.
Statue at Optus Oval.
I'm not a big fan of putting the statues up, and I'm not a big fan of taking them down either.
But
that's just ridiculous.
And now it's down.
If it's up, I wouldn't have taken it down. No,
I thought that was precipitous, and they did that within 2 days of the conviction.
Yeah, no, so I think that's nonsense.
Mm. Yeah, all right. Over to cricket now, and of course. Baz McCallum, the architect of Bazball, is no longer the is no longer the England coach.
At the England
at Test level, the red ball coach.
Yeah, he's white ball coach now, I think, isn't he?
He continues to be white ball coach. I think it's a capability he's suited to, and I think he'd be a hell of a good coach as well at Test level for certain countries. I don't think the UK was probably a good choice for him as a Test coach. And it means that the death of Bazball, 49 tests while he was coach, 27 losses, 27 wins, 20 losses, series wins against New Zealand, South Australia, Pakistan, and Pakistan. They won 10 of their first 11. And, of course, I think they've lost 6 of their last 7 or something of that order.
Yes, that's right, yes. Lost 7 of their last 9.
You don't get too many draws when you're playing baseball.
No.
Well,
I mean, Gerard Whateley was rabbiting on saying they won nothing. Well, that's just not true. They won 10 of their first 11. They won a couple of series, all that sort of stuff, including a difficult series in Pakistan, where they ran down 2 last day totals really well. But they also, when they gave away a test against India, they gave away a series against India. In England, you know, they all they had to do. They were at the point where all they had to do. Brooke and the former captain were in there. They could knock it into the gaps, and they would have got the runs. At that
I
point.
remember the test. It was a great series.
Yeah,
but they, I think this sort of high stakes stuff. Get out, smack the ball, don't worry if you get out, all that sort of stuff. I don't know that it's suited to Test cricket. Certainly, you've got to be aggressive and you've got to score enough runs to win. But you've always got to. If you don't take 20 wickets, you're not going to win anything.
We have to have more than one speed. You have to have a.
They don't have a spinner.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't have a quality spinner. Let's put it that way. And they've got some sort of military medium bowlers running around for them, with the exception of Jofra Archer and Wood, who probably won't play again with injuries and what have you. I don't see a lot of upside for English Test cricket. And the thing that bothers me about that, Jack, is that if you've got a weak England, or indeed if you've got a weak Australia and an indifferent India, then Test cricket is really got a big, you've got to have real doubts about its future. The good thing that I think that, if we want to look at the good things that Baz has done, it's to make cricket more watchable, drawing bigger crowds in to watch and with television audiences and things like that. He certainly has done that. The experiment around Bazball coming out and trying to smack every ball to the boundary is probably never going to work, and certainly it's not the way players had been raised to play Test cricket. I think it's a mixed legacy, but I don't think I certainly don't think he's failed cricket, the game of cricket. I think what he's done is actually added to the noise and added to the audience around Test cricket. And the big problem is if England flounders, and they've got a problem with a captain. I don't know who captains them, Harry Brook, presumably, but I don't know how that's going to go. And if England cricket flounders, then it's just one more problem for Test cricket to get through.
Mm. Anyway,
a good legacy.
It was fun while it lasted. Gary Sobers?
It was good fun, yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of meeting the great man in Barbados, where he was...
met him in North Melbourne, actually.
Did you? Yeah, I met him at the Hilton Hotel in Barbados.
He lived in Melbourne for a long time. And
he did.
Yeah, played cricket at North Melbourne. Yeah.
He did play at North Melbourne. Greatest cricketer of all time. Those who saw him... I was a bit too young to, I certainly didn't see it anyway. I would have been, about 9 or 10 when he got the big double ton for the rest of the world at the MCG.
The 254, yes.
And people that I know who were there said it was the best innings they've ever seen, and they have not changed their opinion since.
No.
Dennis Lilly talks about bowling to him, and he said, well, you just move your fieldsman a metre and, get all your field right.
And then move him back a metre next time.
He's just smacking them through. I know in that 250-odd, he hit the Ponsford stand with a cover drive, with a the side of the stand.
There were no ropes. There were no ropes in 1972.
I'd never heard, or even I didn't think you could loft a cover drive, Jack. With that sort of power, and he had that. There was nothing he couldn't do on the cricket field. They reckon he would have had the gloves if he couldn't bowl, but he could bowl. He could bowl quick. He could bowl left arm offies. Throw them out the back of the hand when that's suited. It's hard to see how there has been a greater cricketer. Lovely little tribute from our good friends over at Cricket et al, Gideon Hay and others, saying that he was a man who really didn't stop playing cricket. He had to keep playing just to make a few bob. And so played a lot of league cricket in the UK, played county cricket, of course. It's just sort of never-ending sort of game, just because he could pick up, 500 quid here, 500 quid there, that sort of thing.
Well, he liked to spend it too, so he liked to party a little bit.
He did like to party a bit, and so it was a double victory when the South Africans were had their tour of the country cancelled in 70-71, and was replaced by the rest of the world, led by Gary Sobers, Cigar Field. Valet him a wonderful career.
It wasn't just the cricket, of course. He was on a tour of India some years later, doing a promotional tour, and for a few bucks, because he never had. He didn't
make the sort of money that they do now.
Couple devs organising for them to play at a golf course that Gary's heard of, right? And was supposed to be a great golf course somewhere up in the north of India. And he says, look, I haven't got any clubs. Can you organise some clubs for me? And I don't think Capel saw him play, but he remembered that he was a left-handed bat.
Yeah, I was going to say that might be the problem.
He said, because a lot of these cricketers, who play left-handed will actually will play golf right-handed, right? So he thought, I better check. So he sends him a note back saying, the clubs, do you want them left-handed or right-handed? And Gary says, it doesn't matter, mate. I play off two right-handed and I play off scratch left-handed. It's not going to make that much difference here.
Yeah, fair ability there. Like some lefties, he was completely ambidextrous. So I remember seeing him run guys out with right arm throws and things like that. So he had a pronounced left side of his body, but the right wasn't weak either. So just a hell of a good cricketer and a lovely man. And I felt it was a little bit sad when I met him. He was sort of more or less employed as a greeter at the hotel, at the hotel, and that sounds a bit awful and sort of a trivial use of such a great champion. But he would join us at the bar and he would tell stories and those sorts of things too. So it was kind of a lovely thing. But he even at that stage of his career, he still needed to put himself out there to make a quid.
Mm.
Meanwhile, Jack, what's going on in the rugby? Have they gone through this massive reform?
Well, they've done this new thing with, what do they call it, the Nations Championship. It's Northern Hemisphere sides playing against Southern Hemisphere sides, and we've just had a couple of weeks of it, right?
Yeah.
But the idea is it will finish up in Twickenham at the end of the year, where the sixth best on the point scale, the sixth best Northern Hemisphere side will play the sixth best Southern Hemisphere side, et cetera, et cetera. And they go up to the number one versus number one.
Have you got six from the south? There's Australia. I know there's the islands, so there'll be Samoa and there'll be Fiji.
Yeah. Argentina.
Argentina, New Zealand, of course. Yeah, they get the six, but they
get the six. And then we're supposed to care about whether the Northern Hemisphere beats the Southern Hemisphere, and I don't think anyone will care at all.
It sounds like just a rejigging of the World Cup.
It sort of is. It's kind of they're trying to keep the best bits of or borrow the best bits of the Six Nations, which is hugely successful.
Yeah.
But I just don't think it's going. Rugby, the World Cup next year in Australia, the ticket sales are terrific. I think that will be a success, but not much else they're doing actually seems to work.
We cashed up bargains for 2 years, and
well,
send the game down the river after that.
Yeah, they had bucket loads of money after, was it 2003, the World Cup in Australia, and they hosed the whole lot of it up against a wall.
I've told the story. I mean, a mate of mine was development officer for New South Wales Rugby Union, and he was one of 4, and they let him go, and now they don't have any.
Yeah.
So anyway, all right. Well, that does take us out. Perfect timing, Jack. Thank you very much. I want to thank Hong Kong Jack for his thoughts and opinions throughout the show, and thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We will be back. We do apologise for last week. There's been illness and God knows what going on, mad stuff that we couldn't get on. I think when we finish this, Jack's got to get into a cab and go and see his doctor again. So
I've been summoned.
I'll tell you what, you wouldn't want to back good money on us making it next week, but we might. But we might, and if we do, we certainly look forward to bringing another show to you. So we'll be back on or around the 31st of July.
Yeah, here's a tip for you. Here's a tip for you. Don't buy 20-year futures in us.
No, not 20. And I think 5 would be a bit iffy even at the moment. The way I'm feeling it at the moment. But anyway, I want to thank you, listeners, and we will be back with you next week. See ya. Bye.